second video of the day, but I did want to collect my thoughts on this before I head out. I was actually asked by another dungeon master uh, this afternoon if I would attend the DM summit that they're having tonight. I actually hadn't planned on doing so, just simply because I I decided to stop DMing for the rest of the year in this shop. One, because I was burning out. I had basically done every Tuesday, minus one or two of them, since January, um, running this particular campaign, and it's challenging. It's time consuming, and there's creative juices. And some weeks you aren't feeling it. Some weeks you're busy as hell, whatever. And I want to provide a positive experience to the players and all that other stuff. It's hard to come up with something every week, even if you've got a good idea, even if you're kind of cribbing stuff from here and there. It still takes time and effort to prepare, even if you're just doing something light, like, you're going to fight this monster. Okay. Let's figure out what the monster is, try to make it sufficiently challenging, kind of have an idea of what the characters are going to be at your table, how you're going to scale back or forth based on whatever they come up with, whatever your table actually looks like. Um, but the other part is the way okay, so the shop that I work at, I volunteer at as a dungeon master um, from time to time, and I also play there. They have a consistent set of rules and basic, I wouldn't even say rules, just ethics, and a particular set of rules that all players and all player characters abide by in terms of attendance and what the rewards look like and all that other stuff. And on top of this, historically what's happened is that the team of DMs have come up with some sort of interconnecting lore to allow players to shuffle from one table to another in a way that's consistent to the universe, so to speak, because these are one shot campaigns. Okay, most Dungeons and Dragons campaigns have a consistent set of players. Generally speaking, that's the hope anyway. That's not always the case, but a relatively consistent party, a consistent world. It's all self-contained, right? Um, Whereas when you're playing in a larger shop like that over a larger period of time, you may have a kind of a story that your world is developing, but the players come and go and they move from table to table, and some people show up and other people don't, and you have to just kind of adapt, right? So it's actually kind of tough to come up with a consistent world based on the fact that there's so much transition. And there's also the idea that you have to explain somehow how, the adventurer who was in the swamplands of the Bayou of Boone and the Bayou of Bane, or whatever, the land of Bane, I don't remember what Matt's table he calls it exactly, to the county of Haversham, where Lord Dante rules from his iron throne, over to Caden's table, his grindhouse, where it's just all crazy monsters that will kill you. How do I get from one place to the other? Magic. It's magic. We're not going to spend too much time explaining. Um, but that leaves uh, a particular other issue with that is power creep. In particular, um, how do how do you rein in players and their characters so that their powers are consistent, so that we do know what to expect? Part of the beauty, part of the adventure of Dungeons and Dragons, of being a DM, is handing out magic items. You killed the monster. Oh, that guy, the bad guy, was holding a flaming sword of destruction. Now you can use it. Those kinds of things. Um, One of the ways that we reward players in that environment is every session you get the dungeon master to sign off on one of your sheets, on your worksheet, and every signature you get a thing called a moonstone, and moonstones are you can use in the store to buy from a list of magical items that take a certain amount of moonstones based on their rarity and everything else. And then the other thing that we do to limit them is the level progression is the current month plus two at our standard tables, and then the current month plus two divided by two, with the parentheses at the first part, uh, rounded down, for what they call the normal table, the actual beginner table, where you first come to play in the shop. You're at lower level. Um, so everyone's level is capped based on the month of the year. And supposedly, the magical items they have, we have a cap on what scale of magical items they can actually equip. They can own them, but they can't use them unless they hit a certain level. We do level cap that stuff. Uh, and how often they've been there. So, of course, a player who's been attending this place for 2 years has a gajillion gold and more moonstones that they know what to do with. Same here. Uh, because I'm not a power max gamer. Okay, there are items in the list that I want. That I know that are good for a character. I like my adamantine breastplate because you can stealth in it, but they can't crit you. Very handy. I like things like the sun staff or the healing staff because I play clerics. I like things like cloaks of protection and stuff like that. But I don't go crazy. And some people are really nuts about I'm going to get just totally gear out my character or whatever. That's okay. They are allowed. That is what those rewards are for. But you do have a discrepancy between players who've been there a handful of times and the players who've been there for a couple of years. They may be the same level, but this guy's decked out with like, +3 plate and a Holy Avenger, and you've got, a +1 weapon and some other gear because you just haven't been there as long. And that feels a little unfair at a certain point. And then the last part for me is I don't want to run players past level 9 or 10. I just it's that level is hard to manage in terms of the power that characters have. It's not that it's not fun to be powerful, and it's that is what you need to be in order to defeat the bigger monsters and to have the crazier adventures in Dungeons and Dragons. This is true, but it lends itself more to a more consistent campaign where you have 4, maybe 5 players. A lot of times when I sit down at a table to master it, I get 6, 7, 8 players. I cap it at 8. Sometimes I allow a 9th. But the thing is, especially at higher levels, okay, the big issue is that when combat comes around, first of all, when you're not in combat, you want to make sure everybody gets a voice, everybody gets a say, they want to do their thing, and you got to rein them in. They're like, I want to go run off and do something else. Okay, let's make that fast so you come back because we want to keep the party together and not make this all about the you session. But then in combat, you kind of go around based on the initiative order, but you essentially go in a round robin fashion. Everybody gets their turn, and then you go back to the top of the order. So when you have 4 players, things move faster than you would with 9, as you can imagine. And then as levels go up, you can do more things per turn, right? At level 5 in particular, you get 2 attacks. At level 5, you also get the level 3 spells if you're a magic caster, so you can do the fireball or whatever, the big crazy things. And other weird spells that have half a page of description of what they do, and that's just more stuff to throw at the DM. Well, this spell can do this. A lot of times, that's another issue, is that a lot of times the higher level stuff you just unmake and undo your best laid plans that you just laid out for the last 3 hours or longer. You know, oh, you can detect anything you have seen, no matter what plane it is, regardless of their magical protection or whatever. The description of the spell is ridiculous. Then rules is written, okay, I guess you know where this guy is. Oh, you just ran right to him. Oh, you stabbed him. Okay, great. Okay, well, there went 2 hours of mystery that I was hoping you guys would solve because you have a magic spell that solves the puzzle for you better than, Hercule Poirot could. Oh, damn it. All right, what am I going to do for the next hour? Um, anyway, uh, one of the DMs asked that I would come there because she and I are both of a like mind that we're digging way too deep into the weeds on this stuff. And it's not only is it complicated for people like me who are first of all volunteers, second of all don't have a lot of time, third of all don't have necessarily the inclination to get crazy detailed on some of this stuff. We're just trying to tell a story. And last of all, they view any resistance to that stuff with skepticism. And part of the issue and I don't know if I'm going to bring this up tonight, but a big part of the issue is many of us are introverts and organizational thinkers. And so we see problems in terms of objectives to achieve that we can list out. And then if we check the boxes off of that, that solves the problem. Okay. In reality, life is not so simple most of the time. Okay. You're not going to solve what is ultimately a people problem by going down a checklist. You do your best and try to organize your thoughts, of course. But the reality is, when you come up with an elaborate system that looks great on paper, adoption is going to be your challenge. Okay. And I'm going to tell you flat out, I'm not going to adopt most of the stuff that they're going to be talking about, because where they're starting to head into is the economics, the economy of the luck factory environment for players to stay consistent. I don't disagree that there is a need to find balance. But if you throw an elaborate set of rules at me that is going to be at odds with the story I'm going to tell, I'm not going to follow the rules. That's just the way it is, because Dungeons and Dragons is a creative endeavor. Okay. I handed out a Holy Avenger to a level 6 paladin. Okay. Level 7, maybe. That is a very powerful weapon. It is one of the most powerful weapons in the game. Okay. I gave it to her because she's a paladin, because I knew she would be thrilled, because I don't think it's actually super powerful. I mean, it gives you some good stuff. It does, but it's nothing that tilts the table completely. And it was fun. Are players allowed to equip legendary weapons right now? Not according to shop rules, but at my table she could, because I want her to have it, because I want her to be a champion of her god who's going to go out and kick ass. That's what she wants her character to be. I'm going to make that happen for you because I'm the dungeon master and I say so. Right? And that's not fair necessarily to other players, right? I try to distribute this stuff as evenly as I can. Everybody that's at my table who's been there for a while has some story going on, some level of investment, some reward I've given them, something to make them feel invested. And that's really what it comes down to, is that, again, we're dealing with two competing philosophies. One is the idea of a one shot where any comer can at any time insert themselves into this story, insert themselves at this table and play, and then leave and move to another table and have a consistent experience, more or less, even though the dungeon master is different. Okay, fair. On the other side, players want consistency. They want to sit at my table and know that they're part of this world and feel like they're developing a story of some sort. Every player has their own backstory and their own idea of what their character is, and some of them are simple and others are very complex. Other people are very invested in their character development and want something of that out of the experience. And with that's difficult to do with one shots, because the thing is not only am I dealing with 9 players, I'm also trying to deal with a bunch of other players that may come or go, right? And again, I don't want to be expressing favoritism. You've sat at my table 5 times, so this character knows you, and you have a history with this, that, and the other. You're brand new. Nobody knows you. You know, you've got a shared reputation of all adventurers in the guild. That is how it works. Um, and you can't come up with a system that mitigates that. That's all there is to it. We've had the conversation, right? This only works at my table, this particular item. Well, some DMs don't like that, because I don't want an item that only works at one table. I want it to work at all tables. Okay, fair. But at the same time, if I hand out, you know, the staff of death, this holy relic, unholy relic from some ancient dead god, I don't want you, another DM, to have to figure out what to do with that when player X brings it to the table. You know, it doesn't work here. It's got some tie into that other story over there. I don't want to mess with that story. I don't know what the story is. To try to use it and it fizzles is probably how I would say it. It doesn't work over here for some reason. Don't know. There's a strange limitation. Magic, you know? You can't come up with explanations. We had an adventure. Poor Matt. Matt is very much story driven. He doesn't really do much combat. He has kind of these silly worlds that we explore and have fun with, and there's really not a lot of danger. And he had us, this last adventure had us come into this cavern that's full of gold, right? But gold is heavy, you can't carry it all. One of the characters has a portable hole. So, of course, One of the players breaks out his calculator. What is the size of a portable hole? How big is an ounce of gold? How much gold can fit in this magical item? 8 million gold pieces worth, apparently. So apparently he can fill it up with 8 million gold pieces because the dungeon master was foolish enough to say that there's more gold than you can carry out of here. Yes, you had a portable hole. Yes, it's a magical item. No, I did not want you to have 8 million gold pieces. Now I'm screwed. Fortunately, the player who's in question here, he's also a dungeon master, and he's at least flexible with that stuff. And I've had lots of conversations with him. Sometimes the rules, they're just going to screw up my ability to deliver a good story, you know. And you're not wrong. You're not wrong in how you interpreted the rules, but I override, man, because I'm trying to get something done and make something fun here, and that's going to ruin things for me, you know. But anyway, this particular scenario, as we sat around this table, I just kind of became dismayed at the fact that as I was sitting there, people seemed to be heading in this direction of like, let's build a system, let's make a checklist, let's make another website and QR codes and all this. People aren't going to use this stuff, man. Why are you putting too much constraints around a creative process? Okay, board gamers, it's not creative. Okay, fair. You know, I board gamers don't like me particularly because I turn it into a story. I remember what was the name of this game? Something about trains. You know, you're building trains across the nation in the 1800s, and everyone can start on the East Coast, but you can also start in Duluth. And I started in Duluth, and I became the Baron of Duluth, and I borrowed as much money as I could to build as much infrastructure as I can, regardless of the economics of the situation, because I'm going to dominate this board. You know, and they're getting mad at me, of course, because I'm blocking them out of their ability to hit one town or another, and I'm like, I'm the king of Duluth. Get out of my town, you know. I did not win this game, but I did bring a lot of entertainment value for myself to it, at any rate. But that was kind of fun. But you can't. That kind of creativity doesn't belong in board games, and a lot of these guys are board gamers too. They're guys. They're rules lawyers. You know, they read the rules and stuff like that. And the final ultimate issue is Dungeons and Dragons is not a perfect system. Okay, one of the jokes we talk about is the peasant railgun. Okay, it is a free action. They call it a free action to hand somebody something. So if you have something in your hand, you can just give it to another character without having to expend any particular effort within reason. Again, the dungeon master has to rule like, you know, okay, you can't hand him, you know, 100 M&Ms one at a time within your 6 seconds. That's going to consume something. But the rules is written. I can hand somebody something as a free action. So if I have 100 peasants lined up in a row, and I have the first peasant hand a brick to the second peasant, that peasant hands that brick to another person. Pretty soon, you're exceeding the speed of sound. So you have that brick shooting out like a railgun from the final peasant that takes this thing off in a handoff, right? Don't bring physics into a magic world. Don't put physics too heavily onto this. You know, it's killing me, dog. But these same things, they're written as rules, and players want to have rules so that they know what to expect, and that's fair. And we need to establish some guidelines on this stuff. But at the end of the day, the DM has to be given a lot of leeway in order to create a compelling adventure. The continuity is the issue. What happens to that character when they bring it to another table? When they bring that stuff to another table, they bring that story to another table. That's kind of the issue. And in a perfect environment where people are getting paid and or have incredible amounts of time and luxury to do this stuff, where they're spending hours of their week cataloging lore and you know, monster bestiaries and what this player did and that and the other all that other stuff, so that you and then read through it and be consistent from one place to the next, so that another dungeon master comes along, picks them up, or they move to another table and that dungeon master picks them up, that they would be consistent. But that's if you have a lot more time. My daughter was hired as an intern for Bungie over the summer a couple of years ago, and her job was to be a lore master. In particular, what she was doing, she was putting subtitles under different cutscenes for a game called Destiny 2. And part of that was to make sure that the lore was consistent and that the terms were correct. So, when they're like, the sword of Daggeroth was taken from Bagdar, the wicked, in 1380 QR, year of the Revenant or whatever. I don't know, right? But there's a consistent lore, and fans are crazy about this stuff, so you have to have it right. And she would find stuff. She had to figure out who these different people were. But then she'd be like, that sword was given to Vandark the Destroyer in 380, year of the Revenant. You can't have this guy have it now unless you explain how he got his hands on it, doing that stuff. But she was getting paid. It was her full-time job. We don't have anybody like that. We're all volunteers, minus the one guy whose job is actually to provide a consistent, non-consistent experience. He has a couple of handful of characters that are familiar, but the towns are generic, the bars are generic, the adventures are generic, the mission givers are generic, all that stuff, because he's dealing with a highly rotating turnover of player characters, and he just can't afford to be that way. And in fact, if any player or any DM actually digs into players' back histories, it's him, because he performs what's called the Tower, which is the kind of ritual, I guess you would say, the special event where you gather players who've been playing for a while, this final quest, basically to prove that they understand how Dungeons and Dragons works, to throw a puzzle at them, to basic questions about their backstory that they would know the answers to, and some problem to resolve that's related to their character. He's the one that gives that to them. No other DM really does, because of the inconsistency of a one-shot campaign. And a lot of the players or DMs that were responsible for these particular days, these one-shot days, moved on to different events that they do at the store. There are two of them. There's Fem Night, which is, as expected, is women and people identify as such, restricted to them, which apparently is raunchier than any other night, from what I understand. I've never been, but that's what I've heard. And then what's called After Dark, which is the 18 plus campaigns. Neither of these systems follow the rest of those rules. They have player DMs with their own internal consistent stories, their own way of doing things. Their players are pretty dedicated. They only come, there's very little bleed over from the After Dark crowd to the Thursday, Saturday crowd, and vice versa. And the same with the Fem Night. There's a couple, but for the most part, people either do one or the other. And those DMs who do that, they're weighing in on this subject when they're not actually a part of it anymore anyway. That's another piece to this, is like, you're not in here in the trenches with us dealing with this stuff. Not to say that your opinion doesn't matter, but it means a little less in this context. So anyway, that's my thoughts. I'm just trying to put my head together around it before I go and do battle. I think Steph is just looking for someone to be in her corner a little bit on these subjects, because she's feeling frustrated about the fact she's been here long enough to see us go through these gyrations multiple times now, and it doesn't work. And she wants somebody else there as a voice of reason. I don't know how much weight my voice carries in that regard. I know I'm outclassed too, or outnumbered anyway. But I think that at least the two of us who are a little more grizzled to this and a little more reasonable are like, look, there's a lot to be putting on us when we're full-time employed adults. Okay. It's enough for me to spend 3 or 4 hours of a day to come up with some compelling story in a situation that I'm going to deliver for another 4 hours to people sometime that week, and then to think about what happened and to come up with something meaningful for the next week. That's a lot already out of somebody. Now, to have them upload all that and to make that tie and be consistent with the rest of the games that everybody else is uploading, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. And everybody's going to be disappointed again. Anyway, that's it.